Hello and welcome to the Lower League Look League One preview podcast. And no Sam this week. I'm joined by a familiar face, Jamie. How are you?
Hello, Callum. I'm alright. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. It feels weird to be introing these podcasts. I normally leave it to Sam. Sam normally takes the reins, but
It
I think
feels
I've
weird
been
for me doing a podcast not on a Monday. So
we've been let off the leash, and we've changed the format for this week because it's getting towards that crunch period. So we're going to quickly go over all the midweek games and then look at three games. I say in focus, quite briefly in focus, as well as give our fleeting opinions on the rest of this weekend's games, and then we will go into what we think each team would consider a success by the end of this season, going from bottom of the league to the top on the podcast. So let's get started. Jamie, what was your result of midweek? Have you got one game that stands out to you?
well, it has to be the game I was at, doesn't it? I was obviously at the Lincoln game with 6-0, their win against Cambridge. I mean, it was one of those where we went in and all the prep and everything. Nothing pointed to anything other than a routine Lincoln win. But then you get there and you think, well, everything points at a win. It's one of those where you never know, do you? But
Yeah.
then that was quickly gone after about 3 minutes when Jack Moylan scored. So then it was more of a cruise control after the first 10, 15 minutes where it was a bit more even. And honestly, they played them off the park. They really did. And Cambridge sort of sat back, and that was the doing of them, really, because as soon as they sat back, Lincoln were just on them like a flash, and the press was unbelievable. And job done in the first half, and they piled on 4 more in the second half. So it was
You worry for
unbelievable, really.
Cambridge. You worry for Cambridge, I think, don't you? Because if this is the second match under a new manager, that new manager bounce isn't happening.
Mm.
And we saw under Michael Scabala, it took 7 or 8 games for
Yeah.
Lincoln to actually instill that system. I know injuries, you put into context Lincoln's specific situation,
Mm.
but at no time did they lose 6-0 or looked remotely near as bad as Cambridge did. So whether that'll have a galvanizing effect or a really demoralizing one, I've never really considered them in the context for
No.
relegation.
I think
But
it's one of the. I think the 5 points clear, something like that. We aren't checking the table, but there's a couple of teams below them with games in hand, which obviously you add the 3 points on it. It's only two. It's one game. Then you're down to one game. And we were talking to one of the media guys at Cambridge, who were like in the press box with us, and they were saying that they need 2 or 3 more wins. As soon as it gets up to 10 points clear of relegation, then you can relax. But at the minute, he didn't seem sort of full of confidence. But I mean, we will talk about it at the end, won't we? But I will be surprised if they do drop into that relegation zone.
well, them, Burton and Reading all sit 5 points above the drop zone with Cheltenham, who have only played 36 compared to Burton and Cambridge's 37 and Reading's 38 games played. So you'd probably say Reading are in the more perilous position in terms of game played. But yeah, they're certainly not clear of it. And I mean, Cheltenham not in the greatest of form. We'll get onto them as well. But yeah, it's one of them that if neither Burton or Cambridge can muster up a decent run of form, and Cheltenham do get on some form, you worry for all three of them sides just above the drop zone. Obviously, it's all dependent on whether Cheltenham can get their act together.
Well, that's it. It's all. I mean, even teams like Port Vale and Fleetwood, I know they're a little bit further back, but 2 or 3 wins, it's like magical what it can do. I mean, we use the example of Lincoln and how far they've come up from. Obviously, it's a bit of a longer run, but the last few wins have really pushed them towards the playoffs. If a team above them is dropping points like Oxford, Stevenage have been doing in Lincoln's case, but if, like you mentioned, the Cambridges of the world or the Bolton, if the Burton, I beg your pardon, if they drop some points, then it becomes anyone's game, doesn't it? So it's an interesting one to keep an eye on. There's a lot of teams down there, and the teams in the relegation zone, they all just seem not good enough to pick up points. That seems to be the bottom line of it. And
Yeah.
something needs to give, doesn't it? If they are going to start picking up points, especially as we get towards 9 games, 10 games left of the season, it's now or never sort of time for some of the teams down there.
It's certainly getting a bit perilous for a lot of teams, but again, like you say, a few wins can lift you up no end. Looking at some of the other results, standout results for me, obviously Bolton demolition job on Oxford United. Even though Oxford United are technically closer to the playoffs than your Lincoln or your Leyton Orient, with the form that they've been in ever since Des Buckingham has arrived, you keep on thinking, okay, maybe something can, what's it called, can instill them, can boost them up the league, but just nothing seems to be happening at all, really.
Yeah, it's one of them, and I feel like listeners of our Monday podcast will know I say this near enough every week that they were second when Liam Manning left for Bristol City, and now they're they're out of the playoffs. Big part. I think they're down to 8th now, aren't they? Even behind Blackpool. So it's one of those. They're just not picking up points. I mean, the stat I put out, obviously this 5-0 defeat. They've not won back-to-back games since early December, and that was against 2 League Two sides: FA Cup against Grimsby and Bristol Street Motors against Forest Green. The last time they won back-to-back league games was the end of October, start of November, when they beat 2 teams around them, Lincoln and Leyton Orient. So the fact that they're not stringing together a run, that has got to be a concern. And Liam Manning was in charge, I know, for that Lincoln game. So maybe that sort of reads that Des Buckingham hasn't won back-to-back league games so far in his tenure. So they've got to start looking at that as a real issue, because they're not putting together a run of form. They're picking up a win and then they'll lose, and then they'll draw and then they'll win. And then it's just a cycle of inconsistency. And you can't be looking like a team who are going to get in the playoffs if you can't keep even a bit of consistency.
You almost think it's a wonder that they're still in 8th place. I think their form guide's got them down in mid-table over the last 12. So worrying times there. I think the other results that sort of stand out to me was, of course, I think a bit of a nod to Burton. I know they lost at Fratton Park, but only 2-1. It's all right. Limiting Portsmouth to only 2 goals at home sometimes seems quite the achievement. Carlisle gave it a good go against Barnsley, losing 3-2. Obviously, Exeter and Shrewsbury, this game to me was amazing. Between them over the whole season before this game, only 1 goal had separated them. I think Exeter were ahead by 1 goal on goal difference or something throughout the whole season. And then, of course, Exeter go and win 3-0. But then the other game, of course, as we're recording it last night, as you're hearing it probably 2 nights ago, Peterborough, that I don't think it's not a demolition job, was it? Because Stevenage were they put on a decent show, but a very professional performance against a moaning Steve Evans, who seemed to have gone temporarily blind when talking about the referee's performance, considering he didn't even mention that obvious red card, did he?
Yeah, I'll pick the bones out of it. I saw you on about the centre about the Piagiani.
That obvious red card.
Yeah, it was a bit of an elbow, wasn't it? It's maybe one of those that maybe there'd be some retrospective action, because he has elbowed one of the Peterborough attackers in the face.
WWE move on him. Like, come on, it's just ridiculous.
In terms of sort of the other games you mentioned, Exeter, obviously, with those 3 first half goals, Jordan Shipley sent off, I think it was after about 5 minutes. So if you're getting a man down so early on in the game, then you've no chance at all. And Exeter made the best out of that. You mentioned Burton, they scored fairly late on to sort of damage, to sort of shorten limitations in a way. And it wasn't too bad a result. Obviously a defeat, but 2-1, like you mentioned, is not awful. 11 games unbeaten now for Portsmouth. And yeah, not too bad.
It's not 12 though, is it? So it's not Lincoln.
No, it's not quite there. Barnsley is the one that interests me, because obviously they came off that huge defeat against Lincoln on Saturday, and they came back. They were 1-0 down, and they sort of fought back. And this reads to me as they've really ground out a result, which I think is important for a team that are fighting for other automatic places that maybe they've not played too well. They conceded a couple of goals to the team firmly at bottom of the table, but they've got that win, and that's all that matters really at the end of the day. The other game that sort of picked my eye was Leyton Orient, Port Vale, obviously goalless there. Leyton Orient haven't won for 3 games now. That brings them, I think, maybe it's too early to call, but out of the playoff race, because they are 6 points off the playoffs now, and there's obviously Lincoln, Blackpool, and Oxford chasing for Stevenage's spot. So I really think that maybe pulls an end to their playoff chase under Richie Wellens. As for Port Vale, it just keeps getting worse for them. It's 13 games without a win. 2024, they've yet to record a victory and 4 points out of the last 39 available. Not all under Darren Moore, but Darren Moore yet to pick up a win still since he came in February. So not good reading for any Port Vale fans. And it's one of those, they really need to pick it up like we mentioned earlier on. If they don't pick up a win or a few points at the very least these next few games, then the season is going to end in disappointment for them.
I think Darren Moore's going to want this managerial job wiped from his Wikipedia page.
5.5 year contract, whatever it is.
Yeah. It's not worked out. I think me and Sam said when, because obviously Darren Moore and what's his name, Charlton manager, brain freeze,
Nathan Jones.
There we go.
Don't forget my favourite League One manager, Nathan Jones.
They both took over at roughly the same time, and me and Sam said Darren Moore will do the better job out of the two. And
really?
we worried for Charlton. We were like, Nathan Jones, he's a Premier League manager. Is he going to really know the hardships of League One? And it's gone exactly the wrong way,
didn't he? He did it with Luton in the Championship. Yeah. So he was. We were pretty much the opposite on ours. We were with me and Seva, and we've sort of become a Nathan Jones loving on Monday nights. So.
Well, he's. I don't think he's for everyone, but he's certainly doing an all right job at.
Yeah, he's doing a very good job.
At Charlton then. Right, looking at tomorrow's games then, Saturday the 16th of March. Big game week. We said last week that there weren't many standout games last weekend, on Saturday, but they seem to have put them all in this week. So the full fixture list is Barnsley against Cheltenham, Derby against Bolton, huge game that. We'll look at that one in a bit more detail. Exeter against Burton, Fleetwood against Charlton, Lincoln against Bristol, Peterborough against Portsmouth, again another huge game, that one. Port Vale, Oxford, the sides that will probably both miss out on playoffs, but it's for pride, that one, I think. Reading against Cambridge.
Well, Port Vale will definitely miss out on playoffs, won't they?
Oh yeah, so I think I was getting them confused with Leyton Orient. There we go.
They played each other, didn't they, in the midway?
That's why. That'd be why. There you go. You're welcome. Reading against Cambridge. Port Vale fans will definitely take that, won't they? Me confusing them for Orient at this point.
Only just out of the
just out of the playoff pictures. Reading, Cambridge, as we said. Shrewsbury, Carlisle. Stevenage, Leyton Orient, who might get playoffs. Wigan against Blackpool. Wycombe against Northampton Town. So some big games in that list. We're going to have a look at Portsmouth versus Peterborough first. Then James going to have a look at Derby against Bolton. And then we'll look at Stevenage against Orient first. But first of all, of course, Portsmouth against Peterborough. Their record, I wanted to look at their record against the top six sides. So Stevenage, you'd look at the table, probably the outlier on there, now fallen away from that initial top five. That it seems to be, but I looked at the whole of the top six. Portsmouth played 6, won 4, drawn 2. Peterborough have played 7, won 2, drawn 3, and lost 2. So you'd say Portsmouth have got the better record when it comes to these top sides, but Peterborough at the minute, you can't really look past them. I don't, as much as Portsmouth are on this 11-game unbeaten run, Peterborough, it's the style and the way that Peterborough have won these games and to the magnitude of their wins, I think, that is really making me doubt whether they're an obstacle that Portsmouth might not be able to get over this weekend. I'm not sure about you.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's like one of the best defenses in the league in Portsmouth, and still one of the best attacks against what you'd say is probably the most prolific attack. It's a Darren Ferguson side, just exudes goals, doesn't it? And it was a big win for them in midweek, Peterborough, which we sort of mentioned, didn't we? And they're in really, really good form. 6 wins in a row for them. After that tricky run where we saw everyone started writing them off, it was 4 losses in a row, wasn't it? In January, that must have been. And they've come back from that so well. 4 points off the automatics with a game in hand, which obviously will prove important. And this game is hugely important. If they can pick up a win, they not only bring themselves closer to the automatics, but they bring themselves closer to Portsmouth, and it becomes a tighter race for the title as Portsmouth is sort of a little bit of a buffer, isn't there, between Portsmouth and the chasing pack. But this is a huge game. You go for Peterborough. I do reckon Portsmouth will just about get the job done in this one. I think it's a really interesting game.
It is really interesting. You look at, obviously Peterborough have won their last 6 in all comps, I believe. They've won their last 5 in the league. But that only puts them 7th if you look at the last 10 form games.
Right, okay.
Because they've because they've drawn 1 and lost 4 previous to that. So their record is really all over the place. And we talk about consistency being key for any promotion push. I don't know. I think Peterborough are getting into that form now. You could really see Peterborough, if this match goes Peterborough's way, you're looking at that 9-point gap, what it is now to Portsmouth, dropping to 6 points. Then Peterborough have their game in hand, goes down to 3 points. They're only 3 points off top of the league. If results go their way, well, if they make it count. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting. I think Portsmouth, this is the stat, right? They concede more at home than they do away. Yeah. It kind of makes me think that Portsmouth, when they're at home, kind of have this arrogance about them, which isn't a bad thing. And like I think I said a few weeks ago, you need that in a playoff, in a promotion push. But sometimes at home, I get the idea that they get carried away, and they're just like, "Yeah, we're Portsmouth, we're going to score," and then it's just like, "Oh crap, we've conceded. Whoops. Oh well, let's go and score another one," kind of thing is what I'm imagining. And I don't know whether that might catch up to them against Peterborough.
Yeah, they've lost 4 games in the league this season, 2 at home, 2 away. But it is an interesting point you bring up. And Peterborough, obviously, a really good side. They've sort of their home ground. They maintain that well. In terms of the football, maybe not the actual pitch itself, but there's worse offenders in the division. But no, yeah, exactly. Like you've said though, I think it's a really interesting game. There's a reason you pick out in the first versus fourth. You don't sort of. It's just a huge game, really, really huge game, and maybe it's a bigger game for Peterborough in terms of closing that gap. And if teams win around them, that's always the trouble, isn't it? Because you just slip off, and there's so many teams up and around that. There's obviously that top 5 fighting it out for 2 spots, and there's one defeat doesn't it? But they're hitting form at the right time. I think that's the key. That they've Peterborough, Portsmouth, I beg your pardon, are on this really long run that you feel like they've got 9 games left. Can they have a 20-game unbeaten run? Whereas Peterborough, 6 games unbeaten, it's more believable that they'll have a 15-game unbeaten run or whatever it might turn out to be. So it's one of those where they're hitting form at the perfect time, but we'll have to wait and see. It could be another playoff disaster for them waiting.
Well, we're not equating these to the predictions that me and Sam do. We'll keep this separate because my record is shocking enough as it is. I couldn't do with with another bad prediction week. But to have a punt in the dark, Jamie, what are you going score-wise for this one?
Well, it's going to be close, isn't it? That's the obvious thing to say. I do reckon Portsmouth will pip it. I'll go for 2-1.
I think there'll be goals in this one, and I think Peterborough will humble them 3-1. I do think it'll be a 3-1 Peterborough. That's probably going to be wrong, as all my predictions tend to be.
It's bold.
It is bold, but just with the way that Peterborough are playing at the minute, I think I'm well and truly on the hype train.
Their goal scoring is fantastic. I mean, they're the top scorers in the league for a reason, aren't they? Yeah. And they just when they're in form, they fly, and they showed that. Maybe they weren't sort of played amazingly in midweek, but they've still scored 3 goals, haven't they? And it's one of those where they're on form, or at least near on form, that the goals will soon come for them, and that's the message, that they can keep that up, score a couple against Portsmouth, and then you put yourself in a good situation. Because I mean, their defence is the worst of the top 4, but I mean, they are 4th. You should expect that. So they're still in a good spot if they can put a couple of goals past Portsmouth.
Well, next up on our list of games is the one that you've been looking at, Jamie. It's second versus third in the league. If we're looking at the last 10 games, it's third in the form table versus sixth in the form table. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, well, this is another one. It's first versus fourth and second versus third. I mean, they're all playing each other at once. It's quite
Teams are
sort
going
of
to drop points this week, aren't they?
exactly.
At
Yeah, it's
least
quite
two of them,
amazing
yeah.
how it's all worked out on the same weekend. These two huge games. Obviously, if you want some reaction to that, Monday night, the place to go for mine and says process. You've got to get the plug in there, Callum. But on this game, obviously, midweek Derby won 2-1. Dwight Gale's got 3 in 3. A good attacking display from them when you look at the stats. And this is obviously a huge game for both teams. Derby have hit a nice bit of form, and their attack is firing. Like I mentioned there, Dwight Gale with 3 in 3. Waghorn's back from his injury, scored on Saturday, just gone, came on as a substitute and scored in that. And it's one of those where they both need a win to sort of keep the pressure on. Bolton are in decent form themselves. And what better way to come into a potentially automatic promotion deciding game than a 5-0 win against a good side still in Oxford, and 9 goals in 3 games for them. So you mentioned a high scoring game. You think it's going to be at Peterborough versus Portsmouth, and this is exactly the same for me. I see this being a really, really high scoring game, and it's a huge game at Pride Park, a really wonderful stadium, and I'm sure there'll be a wonderful atmosphere, won't they? Imagine it'll be packed out, both home and away ends. So this is just a big game, I feel.
Yeah. Crucially, both teams have still got to play Portsmouth left this season. But what it does mean is if this is a draw or whichever side loses, it then takes it out of their hands. So if Bolton win, and even if Portsmouth win, it's still in Bolton's hand if they get a result against Portsmouth. If Derby win and Portsmouth lose, or regardless of what Portsmouth do, if Derby win, I think it's still in their hands. It could still, it's still very close, and well, we'll see. It depends on if Portsmouth get a result against Peterborough. I think they still both need a favour to go, but if either of these sides lose with only one game against Peterborough to go, it could really take it out of their hands.
Yeah, and that game in hand we mentioned as well, that'll come into play with Peterborough. So it's a must win for both teams. Obviously, it's a promotion 6-pointer if there's such a thing. And looking at this sort of the insights on FootMob, this is where these couple of stats have come from. That Mendes Lang, he's ranked first for chances created this season, and ranked second is Aaron Collins, obviously on the other side. So that it looks like there'll be a lot of chances created just off that stat. And in terms of goals scored, Bolton are ranked third, Derby ranked fourth. So it's a game that sort of screams goals. It's one of those, maybe it looks like there'll be lots of goals. It'll turn out to be a 0-0, but I can't see that happening in this case. It's two teams who have hit form at the right time, coming towards the end of the season. 3 wins in a row for Derby, and obviously that huge win in midweek for Bolton that sort of takes them up nicely from a couple of 2-2 draws in a row. I think the one at Barnsley, not too bad in retrospect with the last minute winner and the nature of that win there. But the draw at Exeter, beg your pardon, was a poor result. There's no other way around it. And the goal coming right after half time, 2 goals just after half time, is obviously a negative. But they picked themselves up, dust themselves down, and played really well in midweek. And they can bring that energy and that form, then it's a real challenge for Derby, and just a massive, massive game.
And some team news for Derby. Ryan Nyambe out for the rest of the season, and Jake Rooney as well. Looks like he is out for the rest of the season. So Derby getting hit with some injuries, like every team seems to be doing. But
there's a lot of injuries floating around, isn't there? It's one of those weird seasons where it seems like injuries
no
are
one's
coming in
ever had a
bunches
full
for a lot of
team.
teams. Yeah. It's all about squad depth this year.
The modern game, anyway. What score have you gone for with this one? Have you told us?
Oh, what score? Well, It's a difficult one. It's really. I don't want to say a draw because that's boring, isn't it? You can't predict a draw. I reckon Derby will just the home advantage. Maybe that'll be the thing that sort of tips them over. I had 2-1 before. We'll go 3-2. We'll go really adventurous. We'll go 3-2 Derby.
I was thinking that. Go on then. I'll go 2-1 Derby. I think we'll both pip Derby. I was going to go 3-2, but I can't bring myself to agreeing with you.
It'll be a
finally,
first for everything one day.
We'll go over this one quickly, and then all the other games we'll do quick.
I mean, even though we both picked Derby, it's anyone's game. That one, isn't it?
Completely. So Stevenage, Luton, we'll do this one quickly. Stevenage now winless in 3. 13th in goals scored, but only 3 teams have conceded less than them. Funnily enough, both teams don't really like having the ball. Stevenage only average 48% possession at home. Orient 50% possession when they're away from home. No wins in 3 for Orient either, and they've conceded only 2, but they've also scored 0 in that time. But they've conceded less away than at home and score more away. But it's one of them that even though they've conceded less away and scored more away, they have more points per game at home. So stats can tell you whatever you want them to.
Well, that's it, yeah. Well, that's the thing, is you can always find a stat to back up what you want to say, and Leyton Orient are an interesting one for me in terms of the fact that they don't really score too many goals. They've scored 43 and conceded 44. They're in 10th. They've got a negative goal difference in 10th, which seems to be quite remarkable, really.
That was Lincoln's thing, wasn't it? Before
Saturday, yeah. What have you got against Leyton Orient? You called them Port Vale, and now you call them Luton, and it's all.
Did I call the Luton slip out there?
It's all going wrong for Leyton Orient. I know it's Richie Wellens.
It's Sam. It's just because Sam's not here. I just don't like without Sam. If Sam wasn't my normal co-host, I just wouldn't care about them. So I guess it's slipping out. Sorry, Sam.
It's like you mentioned there. Both teams haven't won in 3 games, and they both need a win, if we can say that, for another game. Leyton Orient, if they want to keep themselves with any sort of hope of the playoffs, have to go to Stevenage and pick up some points, a big result it would be if they can do it. And Stevenage, they're looking over the shoulders now. Obviously, Blackpool and Oxford only 1 point behind them, and Lincoln just the 3. And only Oxford don't have a better goal difference than Stevenage at present. Obviously, those 11 goals over the past couple of games helping Lincoln massively there. So Stevenage, they've got to pick form back up, really. Midweek, they've got to dust themselves down. It's a big defeat, wasn't it, in midweek? They've really got to. It'd be interesting to see if they can pick up straight away from that.
Yeah, this is Orient's last chance of keeping their season alive.
Oh, definitely. If they don't get definitely.
If they don't get a win, I don't think even a draw would be enough. But if they don't get a win, then I can see the season fizzling out. Well, what I will say is it's not often I agree with Steve Evans, but I'm going to agree with him here. Nobody wants them to get promoted. Can you just imagine Stevenage's football in the Championship?
They'd be coming straight back down. I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, but who enjoys it? No one. Enjoys.
Well, we wouldn't have to talk about them on our lovely League One podcast, would we? So
yeah, but we also wouldn't have to talk about them if they got relegated. So I'd rather that happen.
Yeah, the interesting thing on Leyton Orient, if they do win, puts them 3 points behind the playoffs. So it's amazing how one game can turn it around. But obviously, that goal difference then will become a really big factor. And they've got Lincoln on Good Friday, so that tees up to be a big game in terms of 2 teams fighting for the playoffs. So a big game in all respects.
What have you gone score-wise on this one?
It won't be a game with goals. I'll peg my flag to that mast, and I'll go 1-0, and I'll go 1-0 to Stevenage.
You go 1-0 Stevenage. I'm going to go 1-0 Orient. To make up for all my misnaming them, I will go with
just to please Sam on his absence. You could have stuck the boot in on his absence.
No, I care about him, and I care about. He says through gritted teeth. So yeah, we'll quickly go through all the other games. Then Barnsley against Cheltenham. As much as I want to see Cheltenham escape the the drop zones. I can only see this game going one way, a comfortable 2-0 to Barnsley. I know that'll please you. Well, no, it
That'll
won't please you.
please me.
You're a Donny fan. You're not a Barnsley fan, are you? I am
It'll
having a
please Seb,
brain
but it won't
freeze.
please me.
Oh, you're both Yorkshire, aren't you? All the
That's the
same, aren't
main
you?
thing. We don't like being lumped in with Barnsley. But no, it's they'll win this game quite comfortably. I can't say anything other than that. So yeah, I'll go with you. You said 2-0. I 3-1. I don't see the clean sheets aren't huge at the minute for them.
No. Exeter Burton again. I can see this. I'd like to say I can see this only going one way, but that 3-0 victory in midweek for Exeter kind of cements that. I can see a 2-0 Exeter, and Burton are in a little bit of trouble. I mean, I know they've got that 5-point gap, but they are in a little bit of trouble. Their form is nothing to write home about at the moment.
Yeah, it's 5 games without a victory, just 1 point from those 5 games for Burton. And yeah, like you said, they can really best sucked into that problem area down the bottom of the table. I feel all the goals on Tuesday, it's an anomaly, isn't it? With that red card so early on, playing against 10 men for 85 minutes. So, but they do score fairly frequently. Obviously, 2 against Bolton the week before. So I'll go for an Exeter win. I don't think they need it as much, just the fact that they're sort of in that mid-table malaise. But I'll go 1-0.
We'll quick fire the rest of these because I'm aware we need to get to a break. Fleetwood Charlton. I'm going to go with a 1-0 Charlton. It'll be a gritty game, but yeah, 1-0.
Yeah, 2-1 Charlton.
Nathan Jones, through gritted teeth again, has done a good job. Lincoln Bristol, let the jinxes commence. I'm going to go with a 2-0 Lincoln.
Yeah, they've got to lose eventually, but I think they'll be all right. I was going to go 2-0 as well, so yeah, 2-0.
Bristol Rovers seems to be a bit of I don't know. It always seems to be everyone's bogey team because they can just show.
Well, they
up
had Joey
Barton,
didn't they, last year? There was bits of grit to those games. I'll have to save the anecdote till after the break about what happened with Joey Barton last time they were at Lincoln.
Yeah, it was memorable, wasn't it? Port Vale, who are actually playing this time, not Leyton Orient, they're against Oxford. I can see them getting a result here. Port Vale, Oxford. They're kind of the team that you kind of want to face at times, Oxford. So I'm going to go 1-0 Port Vale against all odds. Yeah.
Darren Moore win.
I think it's more a Des Buckingham loss, if I'm honest. But
well, I mentioned they don't win back-to-back games. They lost in midweek, so they'll win this one, Oxford. I'll go 2-1 to Oxford.
2-1 Oxford. Reading, Cambridge. Reading, obviously, with the news coming out that they're in talks to sell the training facilities. Not
Wickham,
great.
To Wickham
of all teams, yeah. Cambridge, can they bounce back from 6-0? I sort of feel like they can, so I'm going to go 2-0 to Cambridge for some reason.
I'll go for a draw, 1-1.
I like throwing these comeback stories up. Shrewsbury Carlisle. This is a game that no one cares about. I say this a lot about Shrewsbury. No one cares about their games anymore. This will be a 0-0, mainly because I don't care about it.
Well, Shrewsbury have scored the least amount of goals of anyone in the division, and they've not kept a clean sheet in 9. So, you know what? Go on, Carlisle. Have a 3 points. 1-0 Carlisle.
Oh, there we go. Stevenage, Leyton Orient, we have done. Wigan against Blackpool. Wigan, they're very stop-start, aren't they? Then to be fair, so a Blackpool. So 1-1. I think I can see this.
I'll go for 2-1 to Blackpool.
And then finally, Wycombe Wanderers, Northampton Town. The ultimate game of mid-table nobodies. It's going to be 2-0 Northampton, even though Wycombe are probably on the better form of the two. 2-0 Northampton. It's a game that you struggle to get excited about this one, don't you?
Yeah, I guess so. It's one of those mid-table against mid-table, isn't it? The only thing maybe that sways it the other way is last 5 meetings between these teams, Wycombe have won all 5. So I'll continue with that trend and go 2-1 to Wycombe.
Well, thank you for making me sound like a mug on that one. Right, we'll go for a quick break and we'll be back in just a few moments' time. Welcome back to the Lower League Look, League One preview podcast. Now we're going to go through all the teams in League One and make it quite quick because there's 24 to go to. So I'm going to limit it to a minute each. I'll get my timer ready. We've got a minute to go through each one and say what we think a success for theirs would be. It might be that we're able to get through some quite quickly. So we'll start the timer now, and we'll start off with Carlisle. What do you think a successful season would look like for them?
Well, they're going down, so it's not going to be successful for them. Obviously, they want to stay up, but it ain't going to happen. So.
No, I think
Even though I
for
just
them,
predicted them to win just before the advert.
yeah, they are going down. I think it's all about just if you've got any players that are going to stick around next season, give them the minutes, get them embedded into a new system, and just start building for next season. I think is probably their
Yeah, I
their
mean, they brought
best course of
Diamond
action.
in January, didn't they? Obviously, ex-Link,
Yeah,
and he's done nothing of note.
no,
And losing someone like Owen Moxon in January to Portsmouth, that was a huge loss. And it's get ready for relegation. I feel like is
get ready for
the
league.
message to Carlisle. Sorry, Carlisle
Yeah,
fans, but I think they
sorry.
know 16 points off safety.
Right, next up is Port Vale, of course, 23rd in the table, 33 points, 6 points from safety. I mean, again, we could probably do the bottom three all at once. Well, bottom five all at once, really. But it's survival and give Darren. I think their ultimate aim is survival, number one, but then give Darren Moore the tools he needs for a successful rebuild. I think.
I think that's the key, the rebuild. But that only matters if they stay up. If they go down, will Darren Moore want to stick around? Does he want to manage in League Two? Maybe that's the question. I think they will go down. I don't see them picking up enough points to stay up. I even obviously Cheltenham. I feel like have got more chance of staying up, and I even think Fleetwood have got more chance of staying up than Port Vale. They just have nothing going for them at all at the minute, and yeah, I can't see anything other than a relegation. But we could be proven wrong come the end of the season.
Well, let's see. Fleetwood Town next. They're on 33 points as well, 6 points from safety. I think this one, it's less about how they stay up. It's just purely about the dogged fight to stay up, I think.
Yeah, they're actually not in a bad run of form. They're unbeaten in the last 5, but 4 of them being draws. So that's the concern that they are drawing a lot of games. They're sort of looking at the table and got 12 draws seems a lot, and then you look, they've drawn 4 of the last 5. So conscious of my minute running out, I think out of the teams in the relegation zone, I think they've got the most chance of staying up, but I still think it's a tall order.
So yeah, I agree with that. I think it's through nook and cranny they've got to try and stay up. Let's move on to Cheltenham then. I think their aim, and as much as I want to stay survival without the of it getting boring of us all saying the same thing, I think it's just got to, they've got to score goals. You know, okay, they didn't score. Was it the first 11 or something games?
Yeah, they've really missed out for me, haven't they?
But they're still you know, the second lowest scorers in the league, I think. So it's purely just scoring goals is their aim, I think.
Yeah, obviously Alfie May was a big loss. We had him at Doncaster, so I have to mention that. And he was amazing for Cheltenham. He's been amazing for Charlton this season. So he's been the loss, and he was the only person that kept them up last season. If we're really going to be honest about it, that's what kept them in the division. And I look at Cheltenham and their run of form. I'll just quickly have a stab at that. Barnsley and then Peterborough and then Fleetwood on Good Friday. So huge 3 games there. And then after that, towards the end of the season, they've got Lincoln and Stevenage as their last 2 games. So it's a difficult looking run-in for the whole in terms of Cheltenham. And that's kind of why I favour Fleetwood in terms of staying up. But obviously the order of the day is to stay in the division for Cheltenham.
We jump up a bit then to Cambridge. I think it's just understanding how Gary Monk wants to manage his side. I think they probably will stay up, but the players have got to understand. I think it's all about for them just getting to the end of the season and giving Gary Monk, who is probably, I'd say, ceiling as a championship manager. You know, I don't think he's a League One manager. He could be a championship manager, as we've seen, but just giving him the resources he needs to again rebuild that team.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's the rebuild, and we were talking. I sort of were looking in midweek at the players they've got, and they've got a lot of players who are either over 30 or edging towards 30, and it's one of those Gary Monk will probably look towards a bit more youth and a bit more injection of energy in the summer, and that's the key. They need to stay in the division, obviously, and if they do, they can start looking at bringing in some fresh blood and some new ideas and new energy with Gary Monk that will help. They'll be hoping can push them up the table next season.
We'll move on to Burton then. I think purely it's for them. It's what amazes me about Burton, having grown up in that area. They've got such amazing youth facilities and training facilities. They just don't make the most of them. So not only do they need to survive this season, but they also just need to make the most of the facilities they've got because it feels like they're just not.
Yeah, they always strike me as a bit of an odd side, Burton. They're always just a League One team, and that's kind of just where they are, and that's not a bad place for them. And I think they will stay up. Obviously Dino was sort of the X factor, wasn't he, this season? And obviously he's gone now. So staying in the league, obviously the main thing, and just to see where they can go next season, because they don't want to be sort of flirting with relegation next term. They want to sort of be looking up and trying to do something new to push them up the table. But what that will be, I'm not too sure, because they're just a team that sort of sit there, don't they? Yeah.
Moving on to Reading, I think this one's fairly obvious. Sell the club, survive and sell the club.
Yeah, the point deduction, obviously, the only thing that's put them really in that sort of mix down the bottom of the table. They're a good side, obviously, a good manager in Ruben Sellers, and a lot of good players as well. So, like you mentioned there, the selling the club, that is the most important thing, and the thing that will make the most difference for them. So yeah, it's as simple as that, because it's a real mess and really unfortunate for the fans and the players and the staff working there. Just how everything's happened, and you never want that to happen to your football club. So hopefully it's one of those that gets fixed through the summer.
Shrewsbury Town now, I think I'm going to say what they need to do is paint their goals fluorescent and just learn where the actual goal is and get in a striker at the end of the season, because my God, it's just become a bit more interesting as well, I'd probably say, about Shrewsbury. I think is my overall point. Yeah, just
it's going well when Shea Dunkley's your joint second top goal scorer with only Udo in front of him. So a little bit of a just dreadful in front of goal, aren't they? Like you mentioned, there was, I think it was Germany, wasn't it, where all the fans behind the goal were pointing big fluorescent arrows towards the net because the team wasn't scoring. So maybe they need that down at Shrewsbury. So an idea there for the Shrewsbury fans behind the goal: get some arrows and point them towards the goal. But yeah, they'll be safe. It's all about building next season, see if they can sort of bit of progression.
That's the title of this podcast sorted. A solution for Shrewsbury.
Point some arrows towards the goal.
There we go. Next up, Exeter. Again, we're kind of at the point now with these mid-table teams where their seasons are effectively done and then just need to start. It's kind of that football manager cliche. Play your youth players, give them minutes on the pitch, decide what you want the core of your squad to be next season, and start figuring out what the trimming during the summer looks like, I think.
Yeah, I think that's mostly it. Obviously, there's a bit more flexibility with not really much to play for come now. But obviously, you want to win games. The fans want them to win games. That's obviously still important for them. And if they can pick up a few more points, they can move. And they're only 3 points off 13th, 6 points off the top half. So I'm sure, like Exeter and the teams we'll talk about in the next few minutes, they're the teams they'll be hoping for a top half finish. That's sort of like the aim, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that throughout the season, there's been a really big dividing line between top and bottom half, really. And I think my saying for this next one, Charlton, if they can get top half finish, if they push on and get that top half finish, they're going to be ones to watch out for next season. That the impact that Nathan Jones has had is humongous, I think.
Oh, 100%. They've been fantastic, and they're on such a good run now at the minute. Just of how they've turned around that poor run so amazingly through Nathan Jones, and they've been picking up points, draws, and even victories against Derby. They've been facing good teams in the division and getting points. So they've got a team that can be fighting at the top of the division and a manager that is a really good manager for the Championship, never mind League One. So next season, I think they're hot favourites to be pushing towards the top of the table next year. It's all about momentum these last few weeks.
I mean, with the budget they've got, you'd kind of expect it.
Well, it should be, yeah.
Moving on then to Wickham. I mean, it's easy to say for this one that they should be looking at mid-table, but at top half. But I just think Wickham just need to discover what kind of a team they are. I feel like they've just been really inconsistent and kind of just lacking that. They've got nothing to shout about. They haven't got a thing that they're known for at the minute. They, obviously, I think it used to be Gareth Ainsworth or something. So just they've got nothing to kind of
I get what you mean. I mean,
as.
Obviously, like Matt Bloomfield's sort of been there a little. He's been knocking around a little bit for a while, really, at Wickham. Like Gareth Ainsworth was obviously before him, and they're another team that sort of sit around that mid-table spots every season. They're the teams that they'll be hoping one of these years that they'll push for playoffs, because that's the progression, isn't it? If you're sitting in mid-table, the hope is that eventually you'll have enough to mount some sort of playoff push. So, but obviously not this season. And
no.
I'd be surprised if it was next season, because there's obviously some great teams in the division who won't go up, and there'll be some good teams who'll come down.
Wickham next. Again, this one's Wigan next, not Wickham. Wigan, I think it's just making sure that everything off the field is all right, and then building that solid base to push forward next season, like we say with all of these teams. But I think Wigan's best growth can be off the pitch to make sure they don't start negatively on the pitch next season.
Yeah, exactly that. Similar things to what we said about Wickham, really. It's just all about trying to get a top half finish, that being something to aim at for the rest of the season. And not going up, not going down. They're just sort of, the season is fizzling out at teams like Wigan.
Northampton next. Obviously, you'd say top half, but I'd say their main thing is just stopping this current bad form. 4 games without a win, stopping that bad form, because if you end the season on bad form, it's very easy to start next season on that bad form. And Northampton, you worry that if they don't stop this bad form that they're currently heading towards, that could really impact next season.
Yeah, I think that's it. I've always sort of like, maybe fond isn't the right word, but I've always sort of had a little bit of an eye on Northampton, and sort of feeling that they are better than the table suggests a lot of the time. And Mark Leonard's been a bit of a revelation, hasn't he? He's a wonderful player to watch, and he's sort of getting the goals and assists this season still. And like you said, just sort of a bit more progression there. Another team knocking on the door for sort of a shot at the playoffs in the next season after. But it's all about recruitment in the summer. If they can bring in a couple of names, couple of bodies that push that team forward, then that's the key. But just another mid-table sort of season for them.
Bristol Rovers next, currently on 50 points, with a game in hand on most of the teams around them. Obviously, I think it's too late to say they're in with a chance of playoffs. But I think it's, again, a bit like Wickham. It's about gaining that identity. Obviously, under Joey Barton, they had an identity. Whether it was a good one, I'll leave that for the viewers to decide, or listeners to decide. But you often see with a club that lacks an identity, it's hard to get excited about them. And I think Bristol Rovers are kind of slipping into that frame of mind.
Yeah, actually, I was talking about Bristol Rovers earlier today, because obviously they're playing Lincoln on Saturday, and someone I was talking to, they said they're just such a mid-table League One team, and that's kind of where they are. You mentioned the identity that Joey Barton brought. That is sort of, I don't know if X Factor is the right way to describe it, but it's just a bit something more about the team that pushes it above being just a mid-table side. Obviously, Chris Martin's goals have been huge this season for them, 15 for him, and obviously he's getting on in age, so it'd be interesting if they can keep him around, if he can produce next season, if they do keep him around. But it's all about mid-table, pick up a few more points between now and the end of the season, just see how high you can get. Obviously, well, not going to be playoffs, 10 points, 11 points, I beg your pardon, off, but it's just seeing how high you can get, really, isn't it?
Orient now, I think we've covered this one, haven't we? We basically said that if they get 3 points, then playoff. If they get 3 points this weekend, then it's playoffs. If they get no points this weekend, it's build for next season. I think we've kind of summed that up, haven't we?
Yeah, that's exactly it. This weekend's a huge game for them, and then the game against Lincoln. If you pick up 6 points in those two games, obviously they've got a game in between then on that international break when Lincoln have got a weekend off. So 6 points out of those, that's absolutely massive, and that'll put them right back in the picture. But as it stands, not in the playoff picture at all.
Lincoln City, then I think we could do a full podcast on this because we both know more about Lincoln than I'd argue most of the teams in this division. But I think if we'd have been having this discussion 3 weeks ago, I'd have said keep doing what you're doing and just have that identity now that they're building under Skabala. They've got to be aiming for playoffs now. I'm not going to say anything less is unacceptable because it definitely is, but they've got to be aiming for playoffs.
Yeah, it's weird how it's sort of come about because at Christmas it was the season's over, it's going to be mid-table. They really need to pick up some points, otherwise they can really be dragged down to the lower end of the table. But it's been unbelievable how they've turned it around after New Year's Day, that defeat over at Blackpool, and obviously not lost since then. A few draws, and then the wins have started coming, and now the goals are flowing for them. So I feel like maybe this is the thing you were sort of getting at there, in that they have much more freedom than a team like Oxford or Blackpool or Stevenage, who maybe need to get playoffs, or at least their vision expected. Maybe that's probably the best way of describing it. And whereas Lincoln, they have a real freedom in they're not expected to get playoffs. They don't need to get playoffs, sort of a financial reason. So they've really got a free stab at it. So they've got nothing to lose, everything to gain. So I think that makes them a really dangerous prospect coming 9 games left of the season.
Conveniently, Lincoln is the one we've spoken the most about. Oxford United, I think this is... I'm not going to say playoffs. I'm just going to say they need to understand what the hell Des Buckingham wants and whether they want to continue under him. I think it's that simple.
Yeah, I mean, by the sounds of what was going on when he came in, that it was quite a decent compensation package that they had to send out to Mumbai, is where he was, wasn't it? Part of the City group. So obviously he would coach there under their academy, so he's got a bit of history there. But yeah, they just need an identity. Obviously, Des Buckingham has a certain style of football, that Man City group sort of philosophy obviously runs through him. And yeah, he's really got
It doesn't work in League One, I don't think.
Well, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I'm not 100% sure, because you've got teams. Even Michael Scabala plays not Man City sort of football, but attacking, aggressive, free flowing, one touch sort of football. So I think it can work, but it's more difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he just needs to implement it. Maybe coming in partway through the season was difficult because you can't implement those ideas off the bat, and there's no real rest during the season. So I don't think they will get playoffs. Only 1 point off it, but I can't see them picking up more points than Lincoln or the two teams we'll talk about next. So I think it's just all about seeing what Des Buckingham can do in the summer, because next season for them, I think that's a huge season in terms of implementing Buckingham's vision and then turning that into a playoff chase. And because they're looking at getting up out of the division, aren't they?
Yeah. Blackpool, we're this minute per team has gone out the window.
Am I talking a lot more than a minute?
We've talked about Oxford for 1 minute and 45 seconds here, so we'll move quickly.
I've got lots to say about Des Buckingham.
We'll move, or dodged a bullet, I think is the phrase for Lincoln City fans.
Well, yeah.
Blackpool, 1 word playoffs. Is that 1 word? 2 words? 1 hyphenated word?
Little dash in between, yeah. So I reckon it counts. But yeah, exactly that. 1 point off the playoffs. Obviously came down last season, so they'd be hoping to bounce back up, and yeah, exactly that. Playoffs for them. I'll make up my time for Oxford.
Yeah. Stevenage, sack Steve Evans is what we all dream about each night. But I'd probably say, as a fan, you'd probably want to get a bit of form back and hit form going into the playoffs.
Yeah, obviously they're in the driving seat, aren't they, with that game in hand, and they're the ones that are in that spot everyone's trying to take. So it's theirs to lose, and they've had a good go at trying to lose it these last few weeks. So they need to turn it around. Obviously, a big game at the weekend and a few games coming up that they need to pick up some points from. A couple of wins, and the teams below them, maybe it becomes an idea where they're a bit more nervous or not as confident if they're trying to chase a team that keeps getting away from them.
So next up is Barnsley. I'd argue with them. They need to kind of accept that they're not the strongest two teams and gear up to be a playoff side, because it's completely different being a playoff side versus being a side chasing automatic promotion, as we see year after year. So I think it's accepting that they're probably not going to get the two automatic places and knowing that they've got to build for the playoffs, I think, is their best chance.
Yeah, obviously the playoffs are sort of near enough guaranteed. Obviously, 10 points
Yeah.
clear of seventh. They want to get into at least fourth for the home
Homes.
sort of
Yeah.
advantage. But yeah, it's an interesting one in terms of if they can reach the automatics. There's those teams above them maybe are stronger. I still feel they'll have they'll have their eyes on the playoffs. Only 5 points behind Derby, and they do have a game in hand like Peterborough. So not over yet, but I think it is more likely that they will end up in the playoffs. But it's all about momentum, isn't it? Like you say,
Yeah.
build for the playoffs. If you go into the playoffs on the back of a good run, you're in a much better situation than a team coming into the playoffs off a bad one, even if they are a little bit higher in the table.
Peterborough next. I'd argue what they need to do is learn how to defend a bit better, but just keep winning. If anything, you
Yeah,
look at their goals conceded. Obviously, Barnsley have conceded a few more, but then only Oxford have conceded more in that top 10, I think. So yeah, it's also something like that anyway. But
yeah, I
anyway,
think that's right. Yeah,
just keep that consistency, I think.
yeah.
And they probably will get top two if if they win every game from now to the end, they'll get top two. So
Well, exactly. It's a difficult hill to climb because I do feel Bolton and Derby are stronger teams than Peterborough. But yeah, I think playoffs is where they'll end up. But obviously, they'll be striving for automatics because maybe the sort of the haunting nightmares of last season. Obviously, we all know what happened in the playoffs there for them. That as soon as you get into a situation like that those memories will come back, won't they, for the players and Dan Ferguson that was around for that.
yeah.
So yeah, they'll be trying to avoid playoffs, but I think that is probably where they'll end up.
Bolton next. For me, it's a difficult one because they can either, like I said, with all of these teams, if you feel like for Bolton, if they don't get top two, they drop. They don't get through on the playoffs. I genuinely believe that if they don't get top two, they don't get through in the playoffs. So I think it's top two or break for them, and I'd argue that that's their aim. Is you've got to
Yeah,
make the top two if you're Bolton.
yeah, I think that's interesting. I feel sort of in a similar boat to you. I think playoffs it becomes more difficult for them because I'd back a team like Barnsley in the playoffs over a Bolton. But yeah, the automatics is crucial for them, and they've got the resources, they've got the players, the manager, the body, and everyone behind them to really get into that automatic spot. And that I do feel the need to. I agree with you on that.
Derby then second to last of the list. Derby, I'd say what they've got to do is become more cocky, become more arrogant, and have that league winning mentality. Because I think that's what stops them this year is they don't have the boldness, the brashness that Portsmouth have often had this year. So I think that's the difference between the two. And if Derby want to, the title isn't beyond them, like was said. So I'd say with Derby, they've got to adopt that league winning mentality.
Yeah, I feel like the league winning. Obviously, we'll get to that when we get to Portsmouth, but it's not out of the question. Portsmouth have got some really tough fixtures between now and the end of the season, and Derby have got a slightly easy run, but they're still playing some big teams. So I do feel like that they'll have the eye, half an eye on the title, half an eye on making sure they stay above Bolton and that chasing pack. So I think automatics, you can secure automatics, job done. But
Yeah.
I don't feel it's out of the question that they could pip Portsmouth to the post.
And then finally, Portsmouth. I think it's fairly simple. It's just not only keep doing what you're doing, but just don't change anything at all. Obviously, if injuries happen, you can't help that. But I would purely argue just keep it as it is. Don't change a single thing if you can help it.
Yeah, I mean, they're on an absolutely amazing run, aren't they? 11 games, I think. And one behind Lincoln, as you reminded us earlier on. But they've got some of the games picking them out before now and the end of the season. Peterborough, Barnsley, Derby, Bolton. So they're playing all 4 of those teams below them. And they've got Lincoln last game of the season away from home, which is not an easy game, even if Lincoln are out of playoff contention by then. So it's a difficult run-in they've got, and they just need to keep going like they are, like you've said, because they're obviously playing great football to be where they are in the table, and to win the league with the injuries they've had would be a great achievement and well deserved if they can manage it.
Yeah, they'd be finally back in the championship. Well, unless you've got any final thoughts, I will ask you as a final thought: who do you think will get that 6th place?
Oh dear. Well, I said, I think last week before, that it'd be Stevenage, but they've since lost a couple of games, so I'm a bit more wary. I think I will stick with Stevenage. I think it's between Steve Evans' side and Lincoln. I do think Lincoln will get themselves above Oxford and Blackpool. So I think it's between the two, but I think Stevenage will probably just have enough to make sure they can hold on to that spot.
Well, my reverse psychology worked the other day when I predicted Lincoln City to lose against Barnsley. So I'm going to go with it again. I'm going to go that Steve Evans will take Stevenage to the playoffs, and in the hope that Lincoln will do it, but we'll have to wait and see. If you want reaction then to the weekend's games, as always, the pod with Jamie will be up with Seb after all the games. Is it on Monday you upload that pod, Jamie?
Yeah, Monday night. It'd probably be about 9:30, 10 o'clock. So it's either really late Monday night for you or Tuesday morning commute. You can listen to that. So yeah, Monday, Tuesday.
And then, of course, I think Sam is back next week for some more preview pod looking at. So thank you very much for listening, watching, or whatever it is you've been doing, having us on in the background when you're meant to be doing work. And we'll speak to you very soon. Thank you for listening.